Betwixt and Between, Patterns of Masculine and Feminine Initiation, edited by Louise Mahdi, Stephen Foster, and Meredith Little. From Concrete to Consciousness, The Emergence of the Feminine, Marion Woodman. Marion Woodman examines the process of feminine self-transformation in her essay, From Concrete to Consciousness, The Emergence of the Feminine. She raises the very pertinent question: what can modern women do to redeem their unconscious from the compulsive, materialistic ethos of our capitalist society? Rather than to berate men for their traditional suppression of feminine energy, she challenges modern women to resist the demands of the negative aspect of the devouring mother and to raise their consciousness of themselves, resonating with their own femininity. Within all women, the Great Mother wants to be brought to consciousness. Acknowledging the need for women to express their own femininity through genuine relationships, she examines the passage dreams of women in the process of self-transformation and demonstrates how such dreams connect women to their own inner masculinity. When the ego and the inner partner are working together, the masculine nurtures the feminine. Hence, Woodman advises women to avoid either the unconscious daddy's little girl role or the struggle to compete with men in the unconscious service of the dark, material side of the Great Mother. She links the transformation of modern women with their gradual awakening of their own creative masculinity. Marion Woodman is a Jungian analyst practicing in Toronto, Canada. A diplomate of the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, she is the author of 3 widely acclaimed books on the psychic life and values of modern women: The Owl Was a Baker's Daughter, Obesity, Anorexia Nervosa, and the Repressed Feminine, Addiction to Perfection, The Still Unravished Bride, and The Pregnant Virgin, a process of psychological transformation. Quote, "Ourselves behind ourselves concealed should startle most," unquote. Emily Dickinson. Some years ago, I was traveling in the South Seas. I boarded a plane in one of the island ports. The women passengers were magnificent, massive earth mothers, most of them nearly 6 feet tall, weighing probably 300 pounds. Their shining black hair coiled on top of their heads or falling in long braids over the brilliantly colored Mother Hubbard dresses. Their eyes sparkled with health and good spirits. I, who am not small by Western standards, cuddled in my seat, feeling tiny, delicate, weightless, utterly at peace with so many big mamas to protect me. After some time in an island village, however, my romanticized image of these great earth mothers changed. I saw their pain and the pain in those around them. Becky, for example, ruled her family with her insatiable appetite. Her 20-year-old son, a mere wisp of a boy in appearance, was responsible for feeding his mother. He spent his entire day searching for breadfruit, tara, and coconuts, peeling, shredding, and cooking, terrified of the voices that shrieked at him in the coconut grove. "Faster, Becco, faster!" He nevertheless forced himself to go there in order to fulfill his sole responsibility in life, gathering food to feed his mother. Although he was educated, he showed no resentment. He lived with his family and the pigs and strolled in and out and about their home. He accepted his fate. One day, as she was sitting on the floor, steadfastly shoving breadfruit into her mouth, Becky said, "White people are lucky. They don't have to eat all the time. I have to eat all the time and Becco has to feed me." Her attitude was as resigned as her son's. Eating was her fate. She did not have the ego development which would permit her to assume any conscious control over her life. She could take no responsibility for the freedom of her own will. I shuddered at the ravenous appetite of the unconscious devouring mother, and shuddered equally at the senseless sacrifice of a young man's life to this gaping maw. The devouring mother. Since becoming an analyst, many times I have remembered Becky and Becco in their island home. I do not think of them as representative of their culture. Possibly they were an exception. But that particular mother was the living image of a woman blindly acting out an archetype, powerless to exert any conscious control over her abysmal appetite, powerless to release her enslaved son. Together they were enacting an unconscious destiny. I remember them as I listened to some of my analysants who are, like Becco, feeding their unconscious devouring mother, their infantile masculinity driven to feed their unconscious greedy complex. They frantically strive all day trying to fulfill her ravenous demands, and then, if their addiction happens to be food, they awaken at midnight to find themselves at their refrigerators binging as voraciously as that island woman. I recall Becky sadly saying, "White people are lucky, they don't have to eat all the time." And I think, how thin is our cultural veneer? We whites do our best to disguise our inner unconscious devouring mother. Those of us who have recognized her are continually vigilant in our attempts to control her incessant cravings. But those of us who do not know her blindly live out her terrible aspects. She is manifested in our compulsive desires for more and more love, more and more prestige, power, fame, and fortune, more and more of whatever particular food our greed happens to fancy. The nightmare of Becco and his mother is the nightmare that drives many people into analysis. While destructive behavior like that of Becky and her son is often manifested in the compulsive behavior of an individual analyzan, it also emerges on a general social level in the materialistic ethos of our capitalistic society, the survival of which depends upon ceaseless economic growth and consumption. Although it has long been believed that capitalist society is a patriarchal arrangement because of the inferior roles and limited rewards granted to women, it is important to realize that Becky, not Becco, is in charge. The so-called patriarchy serves the dark side of the Magnum Mater, what Philip Wiley in Generation of Vipers called momism. This dark side is embodied in materialism so pervasive that matter itself, in all its infinite variety, is the divinity we serve. Mater, or matter, the stuff of which a thing is made, has become Western society's dark goddess. From infancy, for example, perhaps even from conception, we are educated in the ways of technology. Like good little machines, we are expected, Becco-like, to perform as we are programmed, marching cheerfully towards the goal that are socially respected. Don't stop, tick-tock, get up, tick-tock, work, work, tick-tock. Driven by clocks, by wasted time, by computers, by every conceivable kind of mechanical device, we attempt to be human beings in an inhuman environment. What do our goals achieve? Where does our driven activity propel us? We end up buried alive under our own accumulated mater. Looked at from the inside, our culture functions in the service of a great mother machine, a devouring collie. Seen from this point of view, Becky and her son Becco provide an image of ourselves in our matter-bound problem. So long as both remain unconscious of the impersonal dynamics governing their relationship, both remain the slaves of the archetype they blindly enact. While in Orwell's 1984 it is Big Brother who is the omnipresent and omniscient, in reality it is the Great Mother who is omnipotent. Big Brother sees everything except the one that Big Brother serves, and that one, she who is omnipotent, is also blind, and is manifested in her ruthless, demanding, cold, and impersonal aspects. Moreover, she is angry, raging, because her worshippers do not recognize her. She wants to be brought to consciousness. The question is not how can we get out of matter, out of the womb of the Great Mother, but how can we redeem her, that is, how can we contact and release the light that is at the heart of her darkness? Becky, envying white women, whom she thought of as free from the necessity that governed her life, was, in her remark to me, unconsciously wondering how she could be released from her bondage to matter. Unfortunately, she did not have sufficient consciousness to formulate the question. Many women who now demand equality with men in the professions are not struggling to overcome the tyranny of the patriarchal order. On the contrary, they are, in their long, regressive, unredeemed identification with matter, struggling to compete with men in the larger, unconscious service of the dark side of the Great Mother. In this crucial respect, their behavior is far more regressive than their active rebellion would suggest. They are becoming the victims of the Great Ma in ways that release her particular fury, while men are as unconsciously victimized as women. This chapter is directed specifically to women who are now finding themselves enslaved to the Great Mother and are coming to realize that the way out offered by the more radical elements of the feminist movement only leads them deeper into her clutches. The price we pay for our enslavement to matter, to the negative devouring Becky, is great. Take her out of her own society, translate her power into that of a superpower, Mother Russia or Mother America, for example, and the false security that I felt on the plane in the South Seas with so many big mamas to protect me assumes a very different shape. The I who felt cuddled, tiny, delicate, weightless, now feels put upon, molested, violated. The terrifying voices that shrieked at Becco in the coconut grove, "Faster, Becco, faster," voices towards which he showed no apparent resentment, do finally take their toll when translated into modern technology, a toll well demonstrated in Frank Coppola's film Koyana Sketsi. Behavior that is directed by a force beyond our control, by a force that must be served, is driven or compulsive. Becky's son is a compulsive personality. Gathering food for a devouring mother who cannot get enough becomes a metaphor for a fully automated society in which human efficiency must aspire to the performance of an automaton. Psychic automatons are addicted personalities governed by mysterious, irrational fetishes. To wean them from their addiction to food, to alcohol, to sex, to drugs, to work, is to wean Beko from Becky. It is not easy. To wean Beko from Becky is also necessary to wean Becky from herself. She is literally eating herself to death. Like her, our society grows on what it devours. It is destroying itself on what it manufactures. Economists call the self-destructive phenomenon economic growth, and economic growth has become the chief measure of society's health. Anyone who weighs 300 pounds and is gaining 10 pounds a month on the stock market must sense that society's way of measuring its health is both perverse and crazy. A society that is devouring its natural resources is not becoming more healthy and more realistic. It is dying as surely as a patient who has gone from 300 to 400 pounds is dying. America at the moment is $200 billion overweight. Many economists predict it will be $300 billion by the end of the century. One day, an obviously anemic woman arrived at my office. When I asked what had happened, she told me she could no longer stand the pressure and took a knife to herself to see if she could relieve it. Now that we have more or less given up on any arms reduction on the assumption that the more heavily armed we are, the safer we are driving ourselves toward the same kind of pressure desperation that drove that woman to thrust a knife into her thighs. Whatever else it does, a hydrogen bomb can release a lot of pressure, everywhere, from the individual to the family, to the tribe, to the nation, to the global community. The pressure is too great. Our hydrogen stockpiles, our nuclear warheads buried in the English countryside and all over Europe, our Becky's swollen stomach and massive poisoned limbs. The Becky I have in mind, i.e. our global negative mother, weighs in the neighborhood of 300 trillion, roughly the price we are now budgeting worldwide for armaments. The Bekos of the world are feeding a ravenously destructive appetite, and it is bound to explode unless Beko can be stopped. Which is to say, unless Becky can be stopped. Becky's compulsive behavior must be redeemed if we are to survive. She not only controls with the machine-like efficiency our waking conscious hours, but our sleeping unconscious hours as well. She works both above and underground. Underground she is worshipped, served, propitiated in fetishes, addictions, ravaging diseases, marital breakdowns, premature deaths. Nothing can satisfy her hunger, which is unconscious, insatiable, and autonomous. Her appetite feeds on its own power, endlessly giving birth to more and more and more, endlessly feeding on what is feeding on her. How can we as individuals bring consciousness to the Great Mother? How can we allow our femininity to blossom, conscious enough to be well grounded in our Great Mother Earth, at the same time conscious enough to redeem her destructive forces? What rites of passage can help us to make the transition from the icon of Beko and Becky to the icon of the redeemed feminine, who is psychologically conscious enough to receive the Holy Spirit and psychologically strong enough to bear the divine child? Contemporary feminists, recognizing the trap into which they might fall, i.e. becoming the enemy they sought to overthrow, have taken a positive approach. These women are genuinely attempting to reconnect with their own lost feminine roots. For such women, the matriarchy that exists at the core of our technological culture is yet another demonic parody of femininity. The unconscious mother is, for them, no role model. They take no satisfaction in the state of nervous collapse to which Saint Laurent is annually reduced in his round-the-clock struggle to keep them clothed. It gives them no satisfaction that men willingly sacrifice their manhood to them, even as they sacrifice their testicles to Great Mother Astarte. They are not gratified to see themselves in vogue paraded like so many queens. These women recognize that it is the negative mother who rules in Becky, and her son Beko is probably gay, and that is not only his manhood that is being destroyed, but their womanhood as well. The function of ritual. The distance between the unconscious Becky, for whom the world, including her son, is so much food to be devoured, and the psychologically conscious woman is still too uncharted to be described with any precision. Many women, however, are creating their own rites, sometimes modeled on ancient rituals celebrating the ancient goddesses, sometimes modeled on rituals that have been guided from within by dreams, by body responses, or active imagination. If the body is allowed to move as it wishes to move, it enacts its own feeling in ritualized movement. These rituals, however unsophisticated, are crucial in reconnecting women to their own instinctual roots. If the ritual emerges from their own authentic being, well-educated women, superbly trained in the ways of technology and rational thinking, and themselves silenced in the presence of their own straightforward, non-negotiable inner truth, for the first time in their complex lives they feel their own I am. One young woman who had been in analysis for 2 years felt very discouraged because despite of her growing understanding of herself as a woman rather than as a daddy's little girl, she was rarely able to enact her own sense of herself in her university training. After months of irrational confrontations with her professors, confrontations which came dangerously close to releasing the hysteria of her locked-in little girl, Catherine was preparing her oral examination for her master's degree. She determined she would not fall into the trap of denying her own inner reality in order to perform as an A student should. She swung between propounding what she knew her professors wanted to hear and withdrawing into silence because she felt that anything she would say as a woman would be childish, silly, stupid, and worst of all, unheard. Worse still, she might find herself rebelling against the humiliation of infantile feeling and overreact, turning questions into assaults upon her own womanhood. On the day of her examination, Catherine prepared an early morning ritual for our small group of closely bonded women. Although her dreams and 2 years of devotion to her conscious standpoint had prepared her inwardly to sacrifice her infantile attitudes, she knew she needed to experience herself as a woman among women in order to validate who she now was. An intuitive person, she had considerable difficulty attempting to stay with existential reality and thus had chosen the turtle as an important symbol of steadfastness, rootedness, and patience in achieving its goal. Catherine owned a bronze candlestick shaped with 4 sturdy feet and a shell that provided a flat surface for a large candle, a balance of fire and earth, spirit and matter. While she told us of the powerful energy and symbolism of the turtle, she directed us in making on our own origami mandalas, since our unpracticed fingers were not dexterous enough to make turtles. As we crouched, creasing and folding and listening, the room became turtle, and each of us was walking on 4 stout legs, carrying our own lighted candles, supporting Catherine on her own feminine ground. The concentrated activity was important to the rite, but more important was the concentration of love which opened every heart in the room. Then she told us about the growth process of the platelets on the shell, how the small must gradually give place to the large, how she must go to her examination and be the person she now was, no matter what the consequences, instead of the performer who could certainly pass with honors. As a ritual food, she had prepared a large pineapple, its platelets still intact. With laughter and thanksgiving, we ate the sweet flesh of the turtle pineapple, and felt a new connection to the earth, to the goddess, to the transpersonal in ourselves and each other. The integrated image of turtle became the foundation of a new world for Catherine, even as turtle was the foundation of the world in the Ojibwe creation myth. There are many references to the turtle or tortoise in the mythology of different cultures, such as in India, Japan, and among the North American Indians. The turtle is safe from attack in its armored house. It is amphibious, that is, it lives in 2 worlds, symbolically. The characteristic of the tortoise are characteristics of the transcendent function, the one that unites pairs of opposites. The coming together each time is the transcendent function. Its functions of rational and irrational data and the functioning together of consciousness and unconscious, of the differentiated function with the inferior function. It is the reconciliation of the pairs of opposites. From this reconciliation, a new thing is always created, a new thing is realized. That is the transcendent function, and that is the tortoise. Catherine had had a compulsive eating problem. Her unconscious drive to devour food carried her into unconscious drives concerning knowledge, money, men. In order to redeem her inner Becky, she had to transform Becky's unconscious behavior into sacred conscious activity. She had to connect her own ego to that archetypal energy without becoming identified with it. With the support of other women, she was able to experience the transpersonal energy, integrate part of it into her own ego, and take the grounding to her examination. The increased conscious awareness of herself, which she achieved in the early morning ritual, was carried into the examination situation. Holding that energy secretly in her heart, she put the chairs in the examination room in a circle and put a bouquet of flowers on the table. Because she was not coming from a place of power, the flowers did not suggest seduction. They were her way of making sure that she was resonating with her own femininity. Instead of the machine-like activity in which given questions would have received given answers, she was able to hear human voices and to respond from her own authentic center. She had the courage to act out her own recognized inner necessity by creating an environment which acknowledged her presence as a woman conscious of herself. rather than falling back into the unconsciousness of Daddy's little girl. By doing this, she overcame the role of which her upbringing would have assigned her. Her professors were open to what she as an individual could offer. Her answers fulfilled human need on both sides. They were all attending an authentic dialogue, a real conversation in which human communion took place. Soul food was being digested instead of intellectual jargon. It was a real balancing act, said Catherine afterwards, balancing the constructive energy of the inner masculine without denying the gentleness of the feminine. It was a balancing act in which her little girl leapt into womanhood as the natural bride of her creative animus. She was conscious enough to be and feminine enough to allow something unique to happen. Her capacity to resonate with her own truth brought a new dimension into the whole situation. Not all rituals are so joyous. Sometimes our group brings the goddess to consciousness through an abortion, a hysterectomy, the menopause, a terminal illness or death. The pattern is constant, the terror of separation, the death of the old, the sacrifice, the stranger through the rites of passage, the rebirth. Always the ritual connects each of us to our own inner depths where we are one with each other and the transcendent power. Always we recognize when we are entering sacred space, are there, and then move out. The demarcation of the sacred and the profane world purifies both, because many women have never known what it is to cherish their own bodies. Rituals involving their entire musculature can become powerful mystery rites. While the outward facts can be described, the inner transformation is veiled in silence. The power of transformative love cannot be articulated. Groups of women who love and support each other in attempting to find their own feminine rhythms and values are the touchstones of the growing recognition of the meaning of femininity. In his essay on Plato and the Primitive, Stanley Diamond provides further insight into the nature and relevance of ritual and drama, drawing on the broad perspective of his study of traditional societies. To clarify, let us consider those ceremonials which devolve upon personal crises, such as death, marriage, puberty, or illness. These can be considered existential situations, that is, people die, marry, sicken, become sexually mature, and economically responsible in all societies. In primitive societies, such ordinary human events are rendered extraordinary, that is, they are made meaningful and valuable, through the medium of the dramatic ceremonies. Here we confront man raising himself above the level of the merely biological, affirming his identity and defining his obligations to himself and to the group. The ritual drama, then, focuses on ordinary human events and makes them, in a sense, sacramental. At the same time, the ceremonials we are speaking of enable the individual to maintain integrity of self while changing life roles. The person is free to act in new ways without crippling anxiety or becoming a social automaton. That is, the person discharges the new status, but the status does not become the person. This, I believe, is the central psychological meaning of the theme of death and rebirth, of constant psychic renewal, which is encountered so frequently in primitive ceremonials. It is an organic theme. What one is emerges out of what one was. There is no mechanical separation, only an organic transition, extending characteristically over a considerable time, often crowded with events, and never traumatic, but modulated and realistic in its effects. Hence, the ceremonies of personal crisis are prototypically dramatic in two related ways. They affirm the human struggle for values within a social setting, while confirming individual identity in the face of ordinary existential situations, such as death or puberty. These ceremonial dramas, then, constitute a shaping and an acting out of the raw materials of life. All primitives have their brilliant moments on this stage, each become the focus of attention by the mere fact of his humanity, and in the light of the ordinary extraordinary events, his kinship to others is clarified. Moreover, these ritual dramas, based on the typical crisis situations, seem to represent the culmination of all primitive art forms. They are, perhaps, the primary form of art, around which cluster most of the aesthetic artifacts of primitive society, the masks, poems, songs, myths, above all the dance, the quintessential rhythm of life and culture. Ritual dramas are not automatic expressions of folk spirit. They were created, just as were the poems, dances, and songs that heighten their impact, by individuals moving in a certain cultural sequence, formed by the tradition and forming it. Whether we call these individuals poet-thinkers, medicine men, or shamans, term used by Paul Radin, seems unimportant. Plainly, they were individuals who recreated with unusual sensitivity to the stresses of the life cycle and were faced, in extreme cases, with the alternative of breaking down or creating meaning out of apparent chaos. Let us call them primitive dramatists. The meanings they created, The conflicts they symbolized, and sometimes resolved in their own pantomimic performances, were felt by the majority of the so-called ordinary individuals. There was, of course, magic here too, but more deeply, there was a perception of human nature that tied the group together. The primitive dramatist served as the lightning rod for the enormously experienced anxieties, which, in concert with his peers and buttressed by tradition, the primitive individual was able to resolve. This is not to say that the primitive dramatist simply invented meanings promiscuously. It was always done within a given socio-economic and natural setting, but he shaped dramatic forms through which the participants were able to clarify their own conflicts and more readily establish their own identities. There was an organic tie, then, between the primitive dramatist and the people at large, the tie of creation and response, which is in itself a type of creation. The difference was that the dramatist lived under relatively continuous stress. Most people only periodically so. The distinctions are a matter of degree. The very presence of the shaman dramatist is a continuous reminder that life often balances on the knife edge between chaos and meaning, and that meaning is created or apprehended by man coming, as it were, naked into the world. If the ritual dramas of passage rites are not enacted with personal introspective and discrimination, the individual does not emerge. Magazines that extol the new woman are replete with multiple choice questions with answers gauged from 1 to 5. By adding up her sum total, the new woman can estimate how well she's preparing herself to fit the new stereotype. But the questions are never formulated to help her to recognize her own values, her own personal strength and limitations, her own uniqueness. Rather, she is encouraged to spend her hard-earned cash on the rituals of expensive magazines, new punk haircuts, Ralph Lauren clothes, and Gucci shoes. She is a new woman because she is what a new woman is supposed to be. She has no sense of her own individuality. She is a walking mask. She has avoided the dramatic rites of passage that take long, lonely hours of ruthlessly looking at herself and saying, "Yes, this is the value to me, that is of no value." These are the rites of passage that demand the courage to stand alone and say, "This is who I am." The new woman who accepts the new stereotype may become anorexic in her attempts to fit into the Calvin Klein jeans that restrict her movement even more than her mother's Playtex girdle. Or she may become bulimic, vomiting out the collective poison she cannot recognize as poison because she cannot listen to her own body, her own being telling her it can no longer digest what society is stuffing down her throat. On the other hand, it is worth pointing out that in our culture, which is so schizophrenically oriented around eating, many young women, consciously or unconsciously, refuse food as a way of saying, whatever that food represents, I reject. Starving, binging, vomiting, and running as fast as they can away from life. They symbolize some basic self-destructive compulsion at the core of our collective psyche. Seen from this point of view, anorexia nervosa becomes an attempt to escape the tyranny of the unconscious mother. Anorexics are the ones who are refusing to make the Passover into womanhood as they perceive it, preferring to starve themselves into breastless, hipless, anorexic skeletons. Looked at as a failed initiation rite, their self-enforced starvation is speaking loud and clear, and from the deepest levels of their psyches is saying no to cosmetic femininity. Moving towards wholeness. Perched on the threshold of a new feminine consciousness, we are terrified to let the old values die because we are afraid to move into the unknown. Many of us are in what Victor Turner calls the liminal state, caught between what is dead and what is not yet born. We find ourselves in the most dangerous period of transformation because we can no longer respect ourselves as we were. Yet we have very little idea of who we may become. Our old support systems have crumbled, but we have not yet found the new cornerstones. Mothers who have no time for being themselves need to hear the whisper of an inner voice that erupts as they drop off the children, run to the supermarket, and dash to their exercise class. If this is life, it's not worth it. However beautiful these women may be, if they are obsessed by achieving and excelling, their center will become an empty hole and their instinctual femininity may unconsciously fall into despair. Worse yet, they may pass this despair onto their children, who may unconsciously pick up their mother's emptiness and sense of death. Any analyst working with an addicted patient is working within a shamanistic initiation rite, attempting to bring new life out of the bones, smashing the rigid stereotype in order to release the individual woman who can say yes to life and herself as a feminine being. People who are not in close contact with their own unconscious have great difficulty accepting the slow, unhurried, cyclic rhythms of nature, which allow time for birth, maturation, and death. When some part of us dies, there must be a time of mourning, a period of withdrawal and introspection, a period of allowing the tears to fall. Tears connect us to our hearts, our real values, our own inner home. Without them, we become brittle, warped prunes instead of plums, born into a society in which rites of passage are not consciously nor firmly entrenched part of our life. We do not understand ritual. We hate death, and we do not really believe in resurrection. The rituals which would connect us with these rhythms in ourselves we find boring. Thus, when the unconscious naturally tries to move us onto a new level of awareness, we feel violated because we are unable to enter the death experience. We experience ourselves as victims rather than participants. We are half aware that some life-threatening sacrifice has been made. Something dead is inside us. Something crazy is going on. But we do not take time to find out who the new person is, nor do we have the slightest idea what territory we have crossed into. The tragedy is that if we do not give ourselves space and time to find out, we attempt to live in the new era despite being inadequately equipped to do so. For we still have only the old concepts of ourselves. We are like confused butterflies just emerged from our chrysalises. Butterflies who still think like caterpillars, yet blame everyone else for damaging our wings. When the truth is, we are afraid to take responsibility for the transformation that has taken place. Instead of taking time to let our beautiful wings unfold in readiness for new life, we fearfully drop back into non-existent cocoons, our protective coverings gone. Once they have contacted their own goddess energy, women are not satisfied in a relationship with a son husband. Consequently, relationships undergo the fire of transformation with all the physical suffering and spiritual torment that transformation entails. Their male partners are forced into a choice, either to end the relationship and look again for an unconscious woman, or to open themselves to their own femininity and nature masculinity. Either way, the transitions in attitudes and behaviors that are necessitated by the birth of a newly conscious femininity are precarious and challenging, demanding the finest honing of sensitivity and perception in both partners. In the uncharted sea of re-emerging energies, there is one huge, unmarked, undersurface rock, and well-intentioned, conscientious explorers often strike. In their delight in experiencing the instinctual energy, they are indeed remembering the power of the great Earth Mother. But if, in their hubris, they take the power as their own and fail to recognize it as an impersonal authority flowing through them, then their ego becomes inflated, because the great Mother is in control. Far from being ignored, abused, and left for dead, she suddenly turns her head, and if she appears in her destructive Kali aspect, women almost inevitably contact an inundation of transpersonal rage and revenge against men, probably the accumulation of centuries of repression. Its intensity can erupt like a fountain of black poison. Caught up by this Kali energy, respectable matrons may suddenly be transformed into screaming maenads out for blood. If they are at all conscious, however, they recognize that their ferocity is more than personal. As individuals, they do not hate the individual men in their lives. They do not really think that all the male sex is a conglomerate of insensitive baby boys who have no understanding of mature relationship. Rather, they move into their own strong ego position, take cognizance of their own personal feelings as distinct from the archetypal rage, and instead of attacking men, they help them to contact their own inner femininity in genuine relationship. As a blind archetype without a strong ego consciousness to control her, the unconscious mother is as selfish and insatiable, destroying and self-destroying as Becky. All the Beckos who come within her orbit do well to escape as furtively as possible. Their fear, conscious or unconscious, of being asked to make the supreme sacrifice of their testicles on her altar is well justified. Without vigilant contemplation and inner dialogue, a person is sucked into her vortex, and she will attack both the outer partner and the inner creative partner, so that the individual becomes driven to possess or contaminated with nameless fears. Succumbing to a blind archetype severs us from our own lives. If we do not consciously recognize what is happening, raw fear and genuine anguish may be twisted into anger and the desire for revenge. A woman, for example, who is being pushed by her own conscience to develop her own musical talents may suddenly find herself enraged by her husband, whom she now experiences as her persecutor. He won't give me time to practice. He won't pay for my lessons, after all I've done for him. He finds every particle of dust and won't eat packaged cookies. She's projecting her own inner unconscious demon, the demon who tells her she cannot play and never will, and asks, who does she think she is anyway? Then it must follow as the night follows the day, As soon as that inner demon is projected, he finds the right target, usually her husband or lover, who retaliates or succumbs depending on his degree of consciousness. This transition situation is full of tears. The old relationship is dead. Parts of both partners are dead. Tears are part of the healing that takes place from the depths of the wounding. They ensure a constant contact with the real feelings that are emerging from the genuine roots of the personality. They differentiate the real from the sentimental and false. They keep us in touch with the goddess who is entering through the wound. According to Jung's concept of psychological growth, the psyche by nature wants to move toward wholeness. Thus, when the structure that has been necessary for a given period of time becomes too small and inadequate for growing consciousness, we begin to feel ourselves banging into bars. One woman dreamed that she was tightly bound in swaddling bands that encased her like a mummy's shroud, and red blood poured out between the bands. She either had to break the mummy case or die within it. Because she was still projecting her jailer, she blamed her husband for binding her there. But as her analysis proceeded, she had to recognize that it was her own hostility to her own inner spiritual man that locked her in. Once that formerly unconscious inner component is contemplated, a whole new set of values, time, and space evolves. Two different realities are operating. In the material world, life is still orderly, ticking by the clock, measuring itself by miles, goals, and achievements. In the eternal world of inner images, paradox is queen. What was certain is uncertain. Real time is timeless. Nothing is but what is not. Heart replaces head, and words mean their opposite. The anguish throbs at the point where the two worlds intersect, the point where divine crosses human, the midpoint of the cross. For a period of time, the two worlds may exist in parallel lines, but inevitably, the underground throbbing becomes a geyser which erupts into the wilderness. Its eruption affects every life within its circumference, for better or for worse. If for worse, then the path taken is archetypal, such as the one followed by Macbeth when the eruption of the self is placed in the hands of the unconscious mother, Lady Macbeth and the three witches. In Jung's term, the geyser erupting in the wilderness would be the transcendent function, which brings together a new unity between conscious and unconscious poles. It is the living symbol which, if contemplated, helps the individual to bring that pregnant new energy from the abyss and unconsciousness into the conscious situation. Once that eruption takes place, the terrified individual may attempt to go back into the safe prison of her swaddling bands, but she does so at the cost of her own life. Even as a baby who did not understand the eyes, hands, feet, lungs, which were developing as potential necessities in utero, must put them into action once the umbilical cord is cut, so the newborn baby from the psyche must be immediately nourished and allowed to adapt to the brave new world. The infant cannot climb again into the mother's womb, but must emerge as a little child with all the energy, faith, hope, and love of the newborn. It is he or she who will be able to play, to dance, to see the kingdom of gods on earth. That child is the imagination, the creative energy that makes a person an individual rather than an automaton. Dreams of passage. Very often before some passage there is a series of death dreams in which mother or father or some beloved older figure either dies or is killed. While some dreams are to be interpreted objectively, i.e. they foretell an actual death, more often they are to be interpreted subjectively, i.e. they foretell an inner death in the dreamer's psyche. A death which can transform energy locked in the complex into energy available to the ego. If, for example, the mother symbolically dies, the infantile needs for security and dependence may also die. If the father symbolically dies, the woman's need to please men may suddenly turn into desire to assert herself, may even release her rage against the beloved man who consciously or unconsciously has stolen her life from her. Violent feelings of release, grief, or hostility may erupt, and physical symptoms may manifest in this state of imbalance. The dreamer may have heard a voice telling her that the sacrifice is necessary. Again, as Macbeth demonstrates, where the death is not properly understood because it remains in the maternal unconscious, the sacrifice, as in the killing of Duncan, is reduced to murder. Sometimes a beloved animal or even a beloved child is sacrificially killed. At any rate, there is always a sense of inevitability that this terrible deed must be done. The old has to go in order to make place for the new. In a vision, one woman received instructions from her wise, old, inner medicine woman, telling her that she must kill her beloved dear companion and teacher. I panic, for in her hands the dagger that pierced my son's heart in an earlier vision. I beg her not to make me kill this beautiful dear, but she stands firm and puts the knife into my hand. Begging her forgiveness, I take the knife and cut open her belly. "Find your heart," says the medicine woman. I reach up into the chest cavity with both arms. It is soft and warm. I cut into her heart and I offer it to the heavens, tears streaming down my face. The deer's blood drips down my white arms. I don't know why, but then I put the heart into my mouth, and as I eat it, two visions suddenly appear. I see the deer in the spirit world. She is free. I have freed her energy from matter. She wanted the spiritual freedom, and that is why I was instructed to kill her. Now she is my spirit guide, and without being tied to the plane of reality, she is free to connect me to the spirit world. The second vision is of a golden cup in my heart, and this cup is connecting my lines of energy to the deer. The cup is full of blood, and the blood keeps spilling out of my heart, but it always remains full, for the deer's heart keeps pumping new blood into the golden cup. My heart is full, my cup runneth over. The love I experience is not my love, it is the deer's love passing through my heart. I embodied her heart, and in so doing I became a vessel for her love. Medicine woman hands me a bowl full of clear water. I wash the blood off my hands. She takes the bowl and then gathers the carcass of the deer into her arms. I will use the skins to make you moccasins so that your feet will be able to hear the heartbeat of earth. This vision was this woman's initiation into her heart. It was the beginning of her move from conditional love, which was the only love she had ever received and therefore the only love she could give, to unconditional love. Before, she had understood love as a weapon of power to achieve what she wanted from those who were dependent on her. Now, through her incorporation of the heart of the deer, she assimilates the love that radiates through all living beings. She experiences herself no longer as one tiny entity, attempting to control her tiny corner of the world by giving or withdrawing love. Rather, she recognizes herself as belonging to the whole of life, and her individual heartbeat as part of the one great heartbeat. She is now a part of the cosmos. As it often happens in fairy tales, the friendly animal must be sacrificed in order to make the passover into the higher realm of love. The natural order is superseded by the supernatural through the conscious recognition that the sacrifice is being required, at whatever anguish cost, and the ego willingly or unwillingly submits. If unwillingly, it is tugged along like a squealing pig going to the slaughter. If willingly, then it moves into the new world with as much dignity as it can muster. Another important milestone which the modern woman encounters on her road to maturity is her rejection of the patriarchy, whose devotion to the status quo reinforces the inertia of the unconscious mother. Many of us are unaware of our devotion to the values and standards which our fathers represent. We have unconsciously accepted ourselves as daughters, and unconsciously act out little girl roles in relation to men. One young woman with her partner was about to purchase a new home when she had the following startling dream. Although her entire analysis had focused on differentiating herself from her mother, this was her first dream of her father. "My brothers and I killed our father. He was haunting us, terrorizing us. We pounded him with heavy stones in the alleyway. We put his body in the car trunk and buried him in a field. Then we went home and tried to act normally. What would mother say? Would she guess? Would she be hysterical? It was hoped that with his death she would stop harassing us too. I don't know why we killed him and not her. She noticed blood on my nightgown and mentioned my period. I was on the period, thank goodness, but felt guilty and scared the cops would come and find us and match the blood types." The dream illustrates the passover into mature womanhood that this young woman is attempting to make. In order to be the virgin bride in relation to her husband, she must symbolically kill her father. What father represents is closely related to her phallic mother, i.e., the mother who domineers with pseudo-masculine power. Even in the dream, she wonders why they killed him and not her. Again, the sacrifice is through the living blood. The dead father's blood on her nightgown could be her menstrual blood, a symbol of her womanhood. Death and resurrection are imagined in the same symbol. Although the dream gave her the strength to commit to the new relationship, she was still not free from her fear of the cops, the guilt she experienced in leaving behind that life that her parents envisioned for her. These feelings of guilt cannot be underestimated. If we ruthlessly attempt to cut ourselves off from our parental world, we cut our feelings and values that make us what we are. We are our parents' children, and most of us have inherited precious gold as well as dung. While negative feelings towards our parents are still alive, a long period of differentiation must ensue, during which the wheat is separated from the chaff. The following dream makes the process clear. I am working in the basement laboratory of a hospital. A woman is very ill in a ward above. Her life depends upon my staying awake to do my task. I have a tiny set of golden scales and golden tweezers and a little heap of red earth. It is my task to keep the scales in perfect balance, grain by grain, as her life energy ebbs and flows. A young man sits beside her, encouraging me to stay awake. In real life, the dreamer was attempting to give up a relationship that had reconstellated her relationship with her father. It was secure and without discord, but at the same time, smothering her growth as an individual. To leave the security of this man's love seemed like choosing death. Over a period of months, grain by grain, the dreamer differentiated her feminine feelings. Differentiation meant the slow, agonizing process of looking herself straight in the eye, discarding what was not hers, taking responsibility for what was. Writing in her journal helped her to articulate her own truth. Guided by her dreams, she tried to answer questions such as, who am I? What is my mother to me? What is my father to me? How many of their attitudes and responses am I blindly living out? What situations are no longer meaningful to me? Do my clothing and lifestyle reflect who I am? Why am I depressed? At what point today did I betray my own being, thus turning my energy against myself? Am I trying to make my lover live out my talents? Can I take responsibility for what I feel? The meticulous grain by grain sorting was crucial in order to find the new balance that would restore the sick part of herself to health. Her tendency was to fall into unconsciousness, but a new inner masculine figure kept her awake. His task as the analytic process evolved was to learn to use the golden sword with love instead of hacking and sawing with his old butcher knife. Eruptions of fear manifesting in rage, jealousy, or revenge had to be tempered with the conscious recognition of the purpose of the break. As the old life was carved away, the spirit of love within the sword was crucial to the dreamer's blossoming femininity. When the ego and the inner partner are working together, the masculine nurtures the feminine. He insists that she take time for herself, that she protect herself from the ravages of a world that would demand all of her time and energy. He cuts with a discerning sword in order to create a world where together they may be. I have mentioned a few of the birth canals through which women in our culture are being challenged to pass. They are hazardous and terrifying for the body and spirit because both must undergo transformative fire. It is my observation that as the psyche attempts to move into a new level of conscious awareness, the original birth trauma is reenacted. A few healthy egos, untrammeled by fear of the unknown, reach out for new life, putting all their energy forward into new possibilities. Others, recognizing the dangers of the dark channel, yet knowing there is light somewhere at the other end, gird their loins and pass through. Others, for reasons which closely mirror the circumstances of their birth, stumble when they are confronted with the possibility of their freedom. When the authoritative voice of the dream says, go, they grit their teeth and say, I won't, I can't, I will not move into life. The pain is too acute, and they fall into unconsciousness. Then the analyst must decide whether to wait for the cycle to come round again, or to act as a midwife and gently but firmly help the baby into the world without the deadening effects of the anesthesia to which the neurosis is addicted. Any addiction, food, work, alcohol, TV, sleep, is rooted in the unconscious yearning to go back to the maternal unconscious. Creative masculinity. I have mentioned the danger of being seduced into looking backward, a danger that is well documented in myths. Where we are going, none of us knows, but it is obvious that an eruption is taking place in our culture. That eruption is mirrored in the dreams of countless women who are bringing their femininity to conscious birth, and with it a new concept of masculinity. The following dream foreshadows the spirit of what the new consciousness may be. It is the dream of a woman who has been through various thresholds during 6 years of analysis and body awareness. My husband is a warrior, fighting afar. I am sitting for a portrait of myself with our newborn twin sons. I want him to share this miracle. I am sitting in a forest clearing, bathed in full sunlight, wearing a white velvet coat with a white wolf collar. I hold the twins, one in each arm, powerful baby boys, both named T. I am also aware that my maid has born twin sons in the forest, and their names are both T. The woman awoke from the dream with an abiding sense of what being is. While her warrior husband meets the challenge of her outer and inner worlds, she abides, serene, confident, cherishing the miracle that has happened to her. Throughout the early years of her analysis, a fiery red wolf, symbolic of a devouring mother complex, had often roamed through her dreams, hungry, restlessly searching. The red animal now appears as a white wolf collar. The passionate, insatiable energy has been sacrificed and transformed into spiritual passion. She sits close to nature, knowing that her shadow maid has also given birth in a deeper part of the forest. The impact of the dream was so intense that the dreamer meditated daily on its feeling tone. After one meditation, she wrote, "I lie on the floor. I feel my bare feet on the warm earth. I feel its solid peace radiating with warm rays up through my dark legs and through my body, mingling with the warmer rays of the sun. I embody tea. The energy of the crossbar shoots through my outstretched arms, wrenching them, opening my heart. My head is severed. My legs and torso rise. Tension, tumult, terror, trying, tears, tryst." These words leap out with my sobbing, "Tryst," I scream, and all the shame and guilt and fear, the humiliation, vulnerability, the chaos of all the years of trying to find my own self roll through me, wave after wave of searing pain. Suddenly it is black. I am sucked into darkness. I am terrified. I am dying. I am being born. Then the torment ceases. I lie exhausted with time. Months later, she dared to incorporate the T. My body sings, tree, trunk, torso, tongue, touch, tear, tender, trespass, torrid, trust, total, temple, triumph. I remember my exquisite body, its sinews, its skeleton, its perception, its obliterated suffering, childhood suffering locked in its muscles. I go into its darkness, my unconscious identification with its density. This abandoned mound of flesh I have logged around. I feel grief. I love her. I beg her to forgive me. Darkness comprehends light, her wisdom, ancient, more ancient than I, shines. My body, my soul, my beloved enemy. My arms and chest ache with the pain of too much loving, here now, forever in this moment. Tea opens, soft, flexible, yielding, yielding to tea, vibrant tea, shimmering with light. I let it happen. Cell by cell, my soul opens to my heart. I lie silent in truth. Robert Graves in The White Goddess treats the letters of the alphabet as archetypes. He recognizes that written letters reveal images of nature and finds inherent in these images the energy and truth of instincts. We may regard the letters D and T as twins, the lily white boys clothed in green of the medieval Green Rush's song. D is the oak which rules the waxing part of the year, the sacred druidic oak, the oak of the golden bow. T is the evergreen oak, the bally oak, which rules the waiting part, the bloody oak. Don Tom is a Celtic word for any sacred tree. Jung further amplifies the letter T in his seminars on dream analysis. In prehistoric Egypt, we find the Ta, T, or gibbet form of the cross. This cross was used in its simple form and is thought to have been representative of the phallus. In the Tao, a cross is surmounted by a circle or oval. We have the crux, ansata, the magical key of life. The oval is thought to represent the sistrum, a musical instrument used in the worship of Isis, the goddess of the earth, or possibly to be a modification of the delta, those lands in which the gods played and produced all life, thus again connecting with Isis, or woman. The crux ansata becomes, in this way, the symbol of creation. We find this cross on the most ancient Egyptian monuments, frequently in the hand of a god, priest, or king, Amon-Ra, Neth, Isis, Hathor, and Osiris, or some of these. It was also placed on tombs, presumably having the same significance as the phallus, which signified resurrection. In the paintings on tombs, it is evidently employed by divinities to awaken the dead to new life. We see it as thus in a 12th century relief, where a goddess is holding the crux ansata to the nostrils of a dead king. The inscription reading, "I give thee life, stability, purity, like Ra, eternally." It was also held out toward the living as a sign of vital power. Both the Tau, T, and the astronomical cross of Egypt are conspicuous in the remains of Talink. Ta was the sign which Moses instructed his people to mark in blood on the doorposts and lintels, so that the chosen people should not be smitten by the Lord. If the letter which has appeared as a dream symbol is embodied, i.e. put into the instincts, through active imagination, its healing power becomes numinous. As a symbol, T usually initiates the movement into the third eye, a movement into transformation. Symbolizing specifically the differentiation of body and spirit, is the letter of crucifixion, which forcibly opens the body, at the same time keeping it flexible, so that light may penetrate the dark flesh. This active imagination imagines one's woman experience the rebirth of the feminine, the soul, and with it, the constellation of the masculine spirit, and the mystical union. Given the space and time, her body, her enemy, reveals her truth. Rooted in the firm ground of nature, the unconscious flesh eventually reveals its truth, its own core of light, its soul. In its joy it opens unawares, and instantaneously the masculine spirit comes to unite with it. Now the inner creative process has begun, and while the warrior husband of the dream may continue to joust with his discerning sword, both in the inner and outer worlds, his introverted side is ready to unite with the inner feminine, bringing life to the seeds of her virgin soil. That creative masculinity, which is so ready to unite with the mature feminine, is manifest in the following dream of a middle-aged woman. I am browsing in an old cemetery. The graves are above the ground, mostly cement vaults. Suddenly I am aware that the top of one is moving. I stop in amazement about 20 feet from it. It is being pushed up from underneath. A powerful masculine arm thrusts the top off. An equally powerful leg swings out over the side, and a magnificent blonde, blue-eyed man rises out of the tomb, laughing and shaking himself. Light bounces off his skin. He opens his arms and strides towards me as if I were his long-lost love. This is my royal Christ. The masculine spirit, freed from the dead stones of the patriarchy, rises up with the joyous energy of the instinctual masculine and unites with the radiant energy of the soul. The stone of the past is rolled away. The vibrant new energy moves toward the feminine as if he had loved her all his life. If only she had known how to release him. Her own femininity is conscious enough to receive him, conscious enough and vulnerable enough, with all the strength that vulnerability demands. In the biblical myth, unconscious Eve is identified with earth, with matter. Because she succumbs to Satan, the serpent, and eats the fruit of the tree of knowledge forbidden by Jehovah, she and the equally unconscious Adam are expelled from the Garden of Eden. Cherubim and a flaming sword prevent their re-entry. In the New Testament, Mary, who comes from a lineage containing 4 harlots, consciously surrenders herself to her destiny and allows her soul to magnify the Lord. The Holy Spirit enters. Matter is redeemed. Mary is the conscious Eve, and Joseph, in spite of his doubts, is conscious enough to obey the voice in his dream, telling him to care for the pregnant woman to whom he is betrothed. At the appointed time and place, the child is born in a cow stable because there is no room in the collective inn. Mary, outcast from society, ponders the truth in her heart and becomes the psychologically conscious feminine to whom the divine child is born. Jung foresaw that a technological civilization hurtling toward its own destruction could eventually undergo an anatiotromia, and that Pope Pius XII's declaration of the Assumptia Maria in 1950 was the Church's way of raising the higher position, the symbol of the feminine godhead, and with it matter. Since it is the Virgin Mary's body which is raised to heaven, emphasis is on the physical, material aspect. What is manifested by our society now, however, is a global obsession with unredeemed matter. Becky and Becco devouring and being devoured. Relationship to the devouring goddess does not give us license for unbridled hedonism, nor mindless ecstasy in the rampant release of animal spirits. That route will abandon us to the density of our own dark bodies, huddling in despair in our own dark garbage. To surrender our frail egos to the collective worship of concretized matter is to succumb to the opacity of evil, impervious to the grace of light. True worship of the goddess is to shake off our lethargy, confront our hubris, and submit to the rites of passage, which will bring her to consciousness. To love her is to commit ourselves to the travail of creating our own ego container, a container strong enough and flexible enough to mirror her divine receptivity. It is possible that the goddess, recognizing the danger of our annihilating ourselves, has decided that it is time to bring herself to consciousness. Like the Old Testament Jehovah, she is allowing her dark side to ravage the modern Jobs, who would otherwise slip into the complacency of worshiping her in her materialistic form. Disdainful of such a demeaning level of consciousness, she ravages us with physical diseases and broken relationships in order to force us to a spiritual level of awareness, a recognition of her as a container of divine creativity, and a recognition of our own bodies as a container of divine wisdom. If we blind ourselves to our own potential, we treat the symptoms. If we have the courage to face our anguish, we are thrown into the disease of our recognizing the rejected soul at the heart of matter. Are our dreams and body experiences suggesting that the emerging of feminine consciousness, and with it the emergence of a new masculinity, are the birth pains of a new understanding of the incarnation? Individually and culturally, something is trying to be born. If only we have the courage to breathe into the pain and the consciousness to let it be.